Every morning, before the sun even had the courage to stretch across the sleepy suburb of Willow Creek, a battered old garbage truck rolled through the streets, its engine coughing into the stillness like an old man reluctant to start the day. The driver wore the same orange vest every morning, reflective, stained, and heavy with years of silent service. His name was Daniel, but hardly anyone knew that. To most of the residents in that pristine, ivy-lined neighborhood, he was just the trash guy. Daniel didn't mind. At least, not in any way he showed. He had the quiet presence of someone who had made peace with solitude. His face was marked not by age but by weight, the kind that comes from carrying things the world doesn't see. Every morning, Daniel would move from house to house, collecting what others threw away: pizza boxes, wine bottles, Amazon packaging, broken toys, and, more often than not, pieces of people's lives they no longer wanted. To the neighborhood, he was invisible, but Daniel noticed everything. There was Mrs. Green at 12 Maple Avenue, always discarding romance novels and old Polaroids. Mr. Brooks at 9 Oak Lane tossed out whiskey bottles like they were candy wrappers. And the Hamilton residence, with its towering gates and sleek imported cars, always threw away things that didn't even look used. It was that kind of neighborhood, polished, wealthy, and not particularly kind to anyone they thought was beneath them, especially Daniel. Blake Hamilton, the teenage son of the richest man on the block, made it his personal mission to mock Daniel whenever he could. "Yo, trash man," Blake would shout from the upstairs balcony, tossing a crumpled soda can onto the driveway. "Missed a spot." His friends laughed. Daniel didn't. He simply picked up the can, nodded politely, and kept moving. Every time. Inside that garbage truck, Daniel kept a notebook. Faded brown cover. Pages filled with dates, addresses, and odd notes like "found working radio," "repairable," or "box of first edition books," "valuable." See, while the rest of Willow Creek slept under their silk sheets and custom skylights, Daniel was learning. He wasn't just collecting trash. He was collecting stories, secrets, clues. At the end of each shift, Daniel drove the truck back to the sanitation lot, clocked out, and returned to his little trailer on the edge of town. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a wobbly fan, and a leaky faucet. But it was home. And inside was Emily, his 8-year-old daughter, who waited for him with sleepy eyes and the biggest smile he'd see all day. "Did they give you a hard time again, Dad?" she'd ask, stirring powdered cocoa into lukewarm milk. "Only the ones who don't know any better," Daniel would say, brushing the dust from her hair. They'd sit together on the couch, peeling leather and missing a leg, and read. Daniel had taught Emily to love books the way some kids loved video games. That night, like every other, he pulled out a slightly burned copy of The Little Prince, salvaged from someone's trash weeks ago, and read until her eyelids fell like shutters on a tired house. Then, when the world slept again, Daniel opened his laptop. The screen flickered. The internet was slow, but he didn't mind. Daniel wasn't browsing social media or watching movies. He was analyzing data, stocks, property values, business trends, coding tutorials. He had taught himself everything from YouTube videos and old textbooks he rescued from bins. The man they mocked every morning was building something no one saw coming. But in the daytime, the abuse continued. One morning, as he approached the Hamiltons' driveway, Blake and his friends stood shirtless, with skateboards in hand. "Hey, Daniel," Blake smirked, pretending to be kind. "My dad said you're the hardest working man in the neighborhood. Maybe someday you'll get promoted to cleaning toilets, too." The laughter exploded. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply replied, "Every job has dignity, Blake. Even if you can't see it yet." That was the first time Blake didn't have a comeback, but it wouldn't be the last time Daniel said something that echoed long after he left. As weeks went by, a strange pattern began to form. Daniel's garbage truck route stayed the same, but his eyes started catching details others missed, like how the Johnsons were putting their house up for sale quietly, or how the corner house that had been empty for years was suddenly getting new plumbing installed. Most people dismiss these as background noise, but Daniel was listening. He started gathering more than trash. Circuit boards, antique clocks, rare books, forgotten photo albums. He fixed them, listed them online, and sold them under a small eBay store he had named Second Chances. Orders trickled in, then poured. Every time he made a sale, Daniel added it to a separate bank account, one only he and the quiet manager at the community bank knew about. He didn't splurge, didn't celebrate, just kept stacking bricks for a future only he believed in. Emily noticed, though. "You stay up so late now," she whispered one night. "Are you building something?" Daniel smiled. "I'm building a ladder, so you never have to pick up what other people throw away. But word travels fast, even in places where people don't talk to their neighbors." One of Blake's viral prank videos caught Daniel on camera. It was edited with loud music, humiliating captions like "Dumpster Daddy" and fake subtitles. It blew up online. 1 million views in 4 days. Daniel became a joke. Some people felt bad. Most just laughed. One day, at the grocery store, a woman giggled behind Daniel's back, whispering, "That's the guy from the trash video." Daniel heard. Emily heard. But they said nothing. That night, Daniel sat at his laptop for hours without typing. The cursor blinked. So did his eyes, but he didn't stop. Instead, he downloaded property records. He made calls. He calculated. Daniel's notebook got thicker. He made his first silent bid on a foreclosed house in Willow Creek under the name Elm Horizon, LLC. Then another. Then 2 more. His garbage truck rolled through the same streets every morning, but no one noticed the change in his eyes. No one saw the way he now looked at every home, every yard, every for sale sign. Not with bitterness, but vision. By the time winter arrived, Daniel had already purchased 4 homes and 1 commercial. Property, all anonymously, all in cash. The garbage man had become a ghost buyer. One evening, Ms. Carter, the elderly woman who lived at the far end of the block, stopped Daniel as he picked up her trash. "I saw that nasty video, sweetheart," she said, handing him a warm muffin. "You hold your head high. They may have more money, but you've got more class." Daniel held back tears. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." She leaned closer and whispered, "And between you and me, I don't trust that Hamilton fellow. Big money, small soul." Daniel chuckled for the first time in days. The year's end, Willow Creek was buzzing with confusion. Properties were being bought, renovated, rented out to new families. A neighborhood that had been a fortress for the rich was slowly, quietly changing. And Daniel, he was still showing up every morning, wearing the same vest, pushing the same bins, but not for much longer, because change was coming, the kind no one could mock, the kind that would leave the entire neighborhood wondering, who was this man we never really saw? It was just another ordinary morning. The sky was brushed with soft golden hues as the sun peeked over the rooftops. Jack stood beside his rusty garbage truck, the cold air stinging his face. The usual smell of waste lingered, but he no longer noticed it. Years of routine had dulled his senses to it. What he hadn't grown immune to, though, were the sharp words and mocking laughs thrown at him by the very people he served. Jack had always tried to stay invisible. He believed that if he did his job quietly, respectfully, maybe people wouldn't look down on him. But reality had taught him otherwise. No matter how early he showed up, how carefully he handled the bins, or how often he smiled, there were always sneers. The trash man, they called him as if that title defined him. He had just finished a round when he overheard a group of teenagers laughing near a gated mansion. "You think he even owns socks without holes?" one of them chuckled. "Bet. His truck costs less than my shoes." Their laughter rang in his ears as he drove away. But this time, instead of letting it fade, something inside him shifted. Later that day, Jack sat in his small one-room apartment. The ceiling fan creaked overhead, and the sounds of sirens drifted in from the street below. He stared at the wall, not because it was interesting, but because his mind was racing. The weight of humiliation burned in his chest, but underneath, that pain was a flicker of something more powerful: resolve. He had no fancy degrees, no inheritance, and no mentor to guide him. What he did have was time. Every day he drove around the wealthiest parts of town. He saw the houses. He knew which properties were empty, which ones had "for sale" signs that lingered too long. And he listened. People talked more freely. When they thought the garbage man wasn't paying attention, he picked up pieces of information like he picked up trash, carefully and methodically. That night, Jack opened an old spiral notebook he'd found in a junk pile months ago. He flipped to the first page and wrote in big letters, "Change my life." Underneath, he listed every idea that came to mind. The list was messy and scattered: laundry business, flipping items from garage sales, renting storage space, but they were seeds of something more. Weeks passed, and Jack started to change his routine. After his early morning shifts, he'd visit libraries, read business books, and watch YouTube videos about real estate and investing. He didn't understand everything at first. Terms like capital gains, ROI, and asset leverage were foreign to him, but he was patient. He paused, rewound, and reread until the concepts clicked. One afternoon, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Jack was flipping through a local newspaper when a tiny ad caught his eye. It was an auction notice for a foreclosed house in a nearby neighborhood. The reserve price was low, unusually low. Most people wouldn't give it a second glance. But Jack saw an opportunity. The house had been abandoned for years. The front lawn was overgrown, and the paint was peeling like old wallpaper. But Jack didn't see the mess. He saw potential. He had saved a small amount of money over the years. He rarely went out, cooked his meals, and lived frugally. It wasn't much, but maybe enough. When the auction day arrived, Jack walked into the courthouse wearing his cleanest clothes. Still, he stood out. Others wore suits, carried briefcases, and gave him side glances. He felt like an imposter in a room full of wolves, but he kept his head high. When the bidding started, Jack raised his hand at the first price. The room grew quiet. No one else bid. Maybe they didn't care about the property. Maybe they thought it was beneath them. But for Jack, this was the start of something greater. When the gavel dropped, Jack had done it. He had bought his first property. He stood outside the broken-down house with the keys in his hand. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. This wasn't just a house, it was a symbol. It was proof that even someone like him, someone mocked and ignored, could claim something of value. The house needed work, lots of it. Jack didn't have the money to hire contractors, so he did it himself. He watched tutorials, borrowed tools, and spent weekends scraping, painting, and hammering. It was exhausting, but every drop of sweat was a step toward freedom. As the house slowly transformed, so did Jack. He walked with a little more pride. He started to see himself not just as a garbage collector, but as a man building a future. Still, he told no one. Not his co-workers, not the neighbors, and certainly not the people who once mocked him. Months later, the house was done. Fresh paint, new floors, cleaned yard. It looked nothing like the ruin it had been. Jack listed it for rent, and within days, a family moved in. For the first time in his life, Jack had passive income. It wasn't much, but it was steady. He opened a new notebook and wrote, "Buy another." He kept repeating the process. While others were partying, he was saving. While others scrolled through their phones, he was reading about property taxes and zoning laws. He learned how to negotiate, how to spot good deals, and how to stretch every dollar. His coworkers noticed he was different. One asked if he'd won the lottery. Jack just smiled and said, "Nope, just thinking ahead." Even as his bank account grew, Jack never changed his job. He still woke up before dawn, drove the same truck, and collected the same trash. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. It reminded him where he came from. Years passed. Jack now owned multiple properties across the city. Some were rented, some flipped for profit. But his proudest moment came when he returned to the neighborhood that had mocked him the most. He stood outside a mansion, one of the very ones where teenagers used to laugh at him. It was on sale. The owners had gone bankrupt. Jack didn't even blink. He made an offer, paid in full, and signed the papers. The same gate that once locked him out now opened for him. Jack moved in not because he needed the space, but because of what it represented. He hosted a neighborhood event not long after. People came, curious about the mysterious new owner. When they saw Jack standing there in a crisp shirt, welcoming them with the same smile he had always worn, their jaws dropped. One woman whispered, "Isn't that the garbage man?" Another replied, "No way, that can't be him." But it was. Jack raised his glass and spoke to the crowd. "I've picked up your trash for years. I've walked these streets, listened to your conversations, and watched your world from the sidewalk. You saw a garbage collector. I saw possibilities. And while you laughed, I listened. While you mocked, I learned. Today, I stand here not to prove a point, but to remind anyone who's ever been overlooked. Your worth is not determined by your job title, your clothes, or your bank account. It's defined by your grit, your heart, and your vision." The crowd fell silent. Some were ashamed, others inspired. The old Jack was gone. In his place stood a man who had turned trash into triumph, mockery into motivation, and a job of survival into a mission of success. And he was just getting started. He walked down those same alleys he once swept, but now every crack in the pavement whispered something different to him. Every step he took on that path from the garbage truck to his rented room at the edge of town was heavier than usual, not because of exhaustion, but because of the laughter still ringing in his ears. That cruel moment outside the bakery kept playing in his mind like a broken record. The laughter, the pointing fingers, the way that man shouted, "What's a garbage man doing in a place like this?" David had always carried himself with quiet dignity. He knew his job was seen by many as lowly, but to him there was honor in hard work. There was pride in serving his community. Still, he couldn't lie to himself. This humiliation cut deep. It wasn't just about the insult. It was the look in their eyes. That mix of superiority and dismissal as if he were invisible, or worse, disposable. He sat on the edge of his bed that night, staring at the stack of books he had collected from second-hand stores, real estate investing, entrepreneurship, personal development. Every night, after long hours of lifting bags and sorting trash, he had read those books by the light of a second-hand lamp. His hands, calloused from years of work, flipped pages. With surprising gentleness, he had dreams, quiet, powerful dreams. But tonight, those dreams felt buried beneath the weight of shame. And yet, something stirred within him. He remembered a story from one of the books about a man who built an empire from nothing. That man had been laughed at too. That story had stayed with him. And now, it felt like a match had been struck inside him, lighting a spark that refused to go out. The next morning, David did something different. After his shift, instead of going straight home, he went to the library. He sat there for hours, studying, scribbling notes in a small notebook he kept in his coat pocket. He researched property values, zoning laws, and low-income housing programs. He didn't have much money, but he had saved. And more importantly, he had time, patience, and a reason. Weeks turned into months. He changed his routine. He spent less, saved more. He picked up weekend shifts and odd jobs to build his small pile of savings. The other workers noticed a change in him. He was quieter, more focused. They joked that he looked like he was plotting something, And they weren't wrong. One of his co-workers, an older man named Mike, noticed David poring over papers during breaks. "What are you up to, kid?" he asked one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. David looked up and smiled. "I'm going to buy this town, Mike." Mike chuckled, thinking it was a joke, but David didn't laugh. He looked dead serious. That moment hung in the air like a quiet promise. A few months later, David made his first move. He found an old abandoned house at the far end of the neighborhood. It had been on the market for years. Crumbling walls, a leaky roof, broken windows. No one wanted it, but David saw potential. He used every cent of his savings and a small community loan to buy it. It was the scariest moment of his life, signing that paper. For someone like him, that wasn't just buying property. That was stepping into a world people told him he didn't belong to. He worked every evening and weekend, fixing the house with his own hands. He patched the roof with salvaged materials. He repainted the walls. He even replanted a small garden out front with flowers he'd rescued from trash piles. Neighbors watched in silence, some with curiosity, others with mockery. But David didn't care. He wasn't doing it for them. He was doing it for himself, and for something bigger. Boy, the end of the year, the house stood proudly on the corner like a quiet monument to persistence. David rented it out to a single mother with 2 kids for a fair price. She cried when she got the keys, thanking him over and over. That was the first time David felt something shift inside. Not just pride, but purpose. He realized then, this wasn't just about property. This was about people. From that day forward, David doubled down. Every paycheck went toward savings. Every break at work was a study session. And every insult from those who still mocked him became fuel. He began networking, attending free seminars, connecting with community groups, even speaking to older landlords who had grown tired of managing properties. Many dismissed him, but a few saw the fire in his eyes. One older gentleman named Mr. Harlow, a retired real estate investor, took an interest in him. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," Harlow said one evening over coffee. "Nobody believed in me either." They started meeting regularly. Harlow taught him the ropes: how to negotiate, how to analyze deals, how to spot a good investment. David soaked it all up like a sponge. Soon, David owned 2 more houses, then a small duplex, all in the same neighborhood that had once sneered at him. He always made sure his tenants were treated with dignity. Clean homes, fair rents, and a listening ear when needed. He remembered what it was like to be on the outside. But even as he grew, the mocking didn't stop. Some residents, especially the wealthy ones, still saw him as the garbage man playing businessman. They made jokes behind his back. A few even spread rumors that he was in over his head. One day, he walked into the same bakery where he had once been laughed at. This time, he wore a clean button-down shirt and carried a portfolio under his arm. The cashier was the same one who had once looked through him. Now, she greeted him with forced politeness. "I'd like to place an order," David said, "for 30 boxed lunches. I'm hosting a community meeting this weekend." As she packed the order, she glanced at the name on the company check he handed her. Reclaimed Roots Properties. David Simmons, owner. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you own that now?" David smiled. "Just trying to make the neighborhood a little better." He left without another word, but inside he felt a quiet satisfaction. The meeting that weekend was held in a small community center that David had helped restore. He had invited tenants, neighbors, local leaders, and even a few skeptics. He presented his vision: affordable housing, clean parks, youth programs. He wasn't just buying properties, he was building a community. People were stunned, not just by his professionalism, but by his passion. A teenager raised his hand during the Q&A. "Mr. Simmons, why are you doing all this?" David looked around the room and paused. "Because I was once invisible in this neighborhood, and I want to make sure no one else feels that way again." That night, his name began to spread, not as a joke, but as a man of vision, as someone who had risen from garbage to greatness, not through shortcuts or inheritance, but through grit, humility, and heart. And yet, he was just getting started. The town hadn't changed, but something within Elijah had shifted permanently. That morning, after yet another mocking remark from one of the wealthier residents, a man who had once borrowed Elijah's jumper cables and never returned them, he stood before his modest mirror and stared into his own eyes. For years, he had accepted the sneers, the whispers behind his back, the looks of pity from children and shame from adults, but no more. Elijah didn't know how or when the plan had started forming in his head, but it was there now, solid, burning with purpose. He didn't want to just survive. He wanted to rewrite everything. He didn't want revenge. He wanted to rise, and that required change, not just of mindset, but of circumstance. For weeks, Elijah finished his shifts and then vanished into the local library. The kind old librarian, Mrs. Jennings, had always liked him. She'd seen him help an elderly man who dropped his groceries and sweep leaves off the library stairs in the fall without being asked. So, when she noticed him returning day after day, sitting in the corner with financial books, real estate guides, and notes upon notes, she finally approached him. "Elijah," she said, carefully placing a cup of tea near his notebook. "You studying for a degree I don't know about?" He looked up a little embarrassed. "Not quite, ma'am. Just figuring things out." She smiled knowingly and said, "Just make sure you remember us when you own the place." He laughed, a little too bitterly, and returned to his reading. But her words echoed in his mind. Remember us. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for everyone who had been looked down upon, everyone working 2 jobs and still struggling, everyone who had been invisible. He began small. He saved every penny. He sold the old comic books he'd collected as a kid, finding out some were worth a surprising amount. He stopped eating out. He even started fixing broken furniture found during his rounds, reselling it after a bit of cleaning and polish. But Elijah knew saving alone wouldn't get him far, so he started investing. He had read about a man who made millions buying run-down properties and fixing them up. Elijah thought, why not me? His first investment was a single parking space in an aging lot near the hospital. Everyone laughed when he mentioned it. "You bought a slab of concrete?" One of the other garbage workers joked, "You building a skyscraper next?" But within a year, that same lot became valuable as the hospital expanded. Elijah rented out his space to a local doctor for more than what he paid for it monthly. He reinvested the profit. Bit by bit, year by year, Elijah began purchasing properties that no one wanted. Cracked sidewalks, moldy basements, forgotten, sheds behind broken fences. He fixed them with his own hands, learned plumbing through YouTube, picked up carpentry from a retired handyman he helped during trash pickups, and slowly, almost invisibly, began rebuilding. By the time the neighborhood noticed, Elijah had already bought 5 houses. It wasn't until he purchased the very duplex where Mr. Chambers, the same man who once refused to shake his hand because he was covered in trash juice, was renting, that people began whispering differently. Elijah bought Chambers' house. "What do you mean? Like, the whole building?" "He's the landlord now." Mr. Chambers was not pleased when the notice came, informing him his lease would not be renewed. He confronted Elijah on the street, his face red with disbelief. "This is some kind of joke, right? You? Owning property?" Elijah simply looked at him, calm, firm, unmoved. "Sir, I suggest you find another place by next month." And he walked away, leaving Chambers sputtering behind him. Word spread like fire. The same people who had mocked him were now suspiciously polite. Elijah would walk down the street and receive nods, awkward smiles, even a few job offers. But he wasn't looking for employment. He was building an empire. His strategy was simple: buy low, fix up, rent affordably. He never charged unfair prices. In fact, most of his tenants said he was the kindest landlord they'd ever met. Repairs were done within days, not weeks. He waived late fees for single mothers, allowed college students grace periods, and even hired a few unemployed tenants to help with property maintenance. That's when the media caught on. A small town blogger published a feature titled, "From Trash to Triumph: The Garbage Collector Who Became a Real Estate Giant." The article went viral. Elijah received interview requests, podcast invites, even a call from a national morning show. And yet nothing changed about his routine. He still wore his boots, still helped kids cross the road, still carried a bag of kibble for the stray dogs in the alley. But the neighborhood, oh, it had changed. He now owned nearly a third of it. People began knocking on his door with apologies wrapped in compliments. "I always knew you were different, Elijah," said Mrs. Parson, who once refused to let her children speak to him. He smiled, nodded, and moved on. But not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because for the first time in his life, Elijah saw people not for what they pretended to be, but for who they were underneath. And in that clarity, he found his real power. He didn't need their approval anymore. He was already building something bigger than their praise. One day, while inspecting a property near the old park, he saw a familiar figure sitting alone on a broken bench. It was Samuel, the boy who once defended him on the school bus. Now a grown man, tired eyes, slouched shoulders. Elijah walked over and sat beside him. "Long time," he said. Samuel blinked, surprised. "Elijah? Wow, look at you." They talked for hours, about life, about choices, about regrets. Samuel had fallen on hard times, laid off, evicted, and living in his car. Elijah listened, just as Samuel once did for him. Then, without ceremony, he handed Samuel a key. "This is for one of my apartments. No rent for the first 6 months. After that, we'll talk." Samuel tried to speak but couldn't. His eyes glistened and he gripped the key like it was gold. "You're an angel," he whispered. Elijah shook his head. "Just a man who remembers." By the end of that year, Elijah had purchased the abandoned mall, turning it into a community center with free tutoring, job counseling, and food banks. Children no longer pointed and laughed. They ran up to him, hugged him, called him Mr. Eli. But the most unexpected twist came when the mayor, yes, the very man who once refused to shake his hand at a town meeting, invited him to run for city council. The room went silent when Elijah entered the hall to announce his answer. He stepped up to the microphone, looked around at the sea of familiar faces, and said, "I'm not here to be your politician. I'm here to be your neighbor. But if you want a voice who understands the dirt, the grind, the struggle, then I'm at your service." Applause thundered through the room. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. As he left that night, the same limo that once carried Wealthy, donors pulled up for him, not as a mockery but as a gift from a grateful friend. And Elijah. He paused, smiled, then waved it off. "I'll walk," he said, "because no ride, no luxury, no title could ever compare to the power of walking proudly down the same streets where you were once overlooked, and now recognized for the strength you always carried." The morning sun crept over the town of Fairview, casting long golden rays across the sleepy rooftops. For the first time in a long while, there was a quiet buzz in the neighborhood. People were beginning to notice the small changes. Streets looked cleaner. The community center had fresh paint. The park benches, once splintered and neglected, had been replaced. And yet no one really knew who was behind it all. Eli, the garbage collector once ridiculed, was at the center of it, but not in a way anyone expected. He didn't flaunt it. He didn't wear suits or drive flashy cars. He still wore his same boots. the same coat with the stitched sleeve. Still, picked up litter if he saw it. Still greeted people with a nod. But something had shifted. People noticed the big trucks with no branding dropping off supplies at the school. They noticed new books in the library. A teacher's old car had suddenly been fixed. Ms. Ramirez, the widow who lived at the end of Elm Street, found a grocery delivery every week like clockwork. No one knew where it came from. Eli knew, but he didn't say a word. He remembered every face that had looked down on him, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He remembered how it felt to be invisible, how people looked through him, like he wasn't even human. And yet he'd risen, not in vengeance, but with grace. It was Martin, the old shopkeeper, who first asked the question out loud. "You reckon it's the city?" he said one morning, nodding toward the new sidewalk lights. Being installed, Jim, the barber, squinted. "The city? You think the council has money for that?" They both laughed, but there was a lingering curiosity in the air. Meanwhile, Eli was moving forward with his plans, silent, deliberate, and deeply personal. He started buying the rundown houses, one by one, quietly, anonymously. Most people didn't even know their landlords had changed. Rent stopped increasing. Repairs were suddenly done on time. Heating issues that had been ignored for years were fixed overnight. Families who'd been on the brink of eviction were given extensions. No explanation, just grace. But it wasn't just about property. Eli invested in people. There was Darren, the boy with a temper, always in trouble. Eli found him one evening, vandalizing a wall near the community garden. Instead of yelling, he stood beside him. "You're angry," he said softly. Darren didn't respond. "You know, when I was your age, I used to steal copper wire from junkyards. Thought it made me tough." The boy looked at him, eyes guarded. "Did you get caught?" "Yeah, plenty of times. But one man, an old janitor, he didn't call the cops. He gave me a sandwich and asked if I'd help him paint a fence. I did, and that fence turned into a job. That job changed my life." Darren blinked. The spray can in his hand felt heavier now. Eli smiled. "Want to help me repaint this wall?" It took weeks, but Darren came back, and he brought his friends. The wall they'd ruined became a mural, bright, proud, and full of color. At the bottom corner, in small letters, it read, "Change starts here." Word started spreading. Whispers, really? Someone was turning Fairview around. No one could pin it on a single person. But people noticed that wherever Eli went, things improved. And yet some folks still didn't see it. Among them was Mr. Crawley, the man who'd once called Eli human trash. He lived in the largest house on the block, wrought iron gates, a fountain that no longer worked. His family had lived in Fairview for generations, and he saw himself as the unofficial leader of the neighborhood. He wasn't happy about the changes. "Who's painting all the houses bright blue and yellow?" he complained. "This is a classic neighborhood, not a clown show." He complained to the HOA, demanded meetings, rallied support from other longtime residents, but most people brushed him off. They liked the changes. They liked seeing children playing in the park again. They liked the way the streets no longer smelled like rot. Crawley seethed. "This is gentrification," he snapped at one meeting, but it wasn't. It was restoration, led by the very man he'd mocked. One afternoon, Eli received a letter, handwritten, sloppy cursive, no return address. It read, "I see what you're doing. You think money buys respect, but it doesn't erase who you are. You'll always be what you were, a garbage man. No name, no signature." Eli folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not out of shame, but as a reminder. He didn't need respect. He needed impact, and impact he made. He set up a scholarship fund under his mother's name. Started a workshop for trade skills, plumbing, electrical, carpentry. invited old colleagues, friends, retired workers. The program offered certifications for free. Dozens of unemployed young men and women signed up. At the graduation ceremony, Eli didn't speak. He stood at the back, hands in pockets, smiling as students received their certificates. But even silence has a voice when it comes from someone who's lived it. There was one moment, however, that changed everything, and it came on a Sunday. The community organized a block party, a tradition that had died out years ago, but this time it was different. People brought food, music played from open windows, and for the first time in decades, Fairview felt alive. Eli sat on a bench near the center, not drawing attention, just watching. Children ran past him, laughing. Old men played dominoes. A woman strummed a guitar softly under the shade. Then the mayor arrived. No one expected it. Cameras clicked. Reporters followed. He walked straight to Eli. "Mr. Price," he said, extending his hand, "we finally meet." Heads turned. "On behalf of the city," the mayor continued, "we want to recognize your contributions, the improvements, the jobs, the community investments. This neighborhood is thriving because of you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eli stood slowly. "I didn't do this for recognition," he said, his voice low but firm. "I did it because this place raised me, even when it didn't know it was doing it." The mayor smiled. "Even so, you've inspired a movement. We're naming this block Eli Price Avenue." Cheers erupted. People clapped. Some wiped tears, and Mr. Crawley, standing by his broken fountain, turned pale. The man he'd once called worthless now had a street named after him, but Eli didn't bask in it. He raised a hand and gestured toward the crowd. "This isn't mine," he said. "This is ours. We built this. One nail, one paint stroke, one act of kindness at a time." He stepped off the platform and melted back into the crowd. Later that night, he sat on his porch, watching the stars. He thought of his mother, how she used to hum gospel songs while sweeping the floor, thought of the nights he came home from work exhausted, covered in grime, and how she always smiled and said, "You did honest work today, baby." Now, the porch had a new coat of paint. The house had been repaired, but he kept her rocking chair, just the way it was, creaky, faded, and full of stories. Fairview had changed, and Eli was just getting started. The seasons changed, and with them, the story of Fairview and Eli Price blossomed into something beautiful and unexpected. What began as a neighborhood mocked and dismissed became a shining example of hope, resilience, and community spirit. Eli stood outside his modest home one early spring morning, watching as the neighborhood around him hummed with life. The streets, once cracked and littered, now gleamed under the fresh sun. Children's laughter echoed from the playground nearby, their faces bright with innocence and joy. Local shop owners waved from their storefronts, their smiles genuine and warm. But Eli knew this transformation wasn't just about new paint or repaired sidewalks. It was about people, about second chances, about a belief that everyone, no matter where they started, could build a future worth living. Though he remained humble, the impact of Eli's work was undeniable. News outlets began to cover the revival of Fairview, sharing stories of how a man who'd been laughed at and underestimated changed the fate of an entire community. Interviews followed, but Eli always deflected praise to the people who made the change possible, the families, the volunteers, and the youth who chose hope over despair. Among those whose lives were touched most deeply was Darren, the troubled teenager Eli once found spray painting the walls. Now a skilled painter and a mentor for younger kids, Darren had turned his life around, crediting Eli's kindness for saving him from a dark path. The mural they painted together still stood tall, a colorful reminder of the power of change. Eli's scholarship fund flourished, enabling dozens of young men and women to pursue education and trade skills they could use to support themselves and their families. The community workshops became weekly events where neighbors shared stories, laughter, and dreams, weaving together a tapestry of shared experience and mutual respect. Yet, despite the accolades and improvements, Eli never forgot the simple truths that grounded him. His mother's wisdom echoed in his heart, that respect is earned by how you treat others, not by wealth or status. He continued his daily routine, rising early, donning his worn boots, and making his rounds through the streets, not as the millionaire he'd become on paper, but as the same man who swept the streets with care. One day, Eli was invited to speak at the town hall. The mayor introduced him warmly, praising his dedication and vision. But when Eli took the stage, he chose to speak from the heart. "I didn't do this alone," he said, voice steady and sincere. "This neighborhood's revival is a testament to what we can accomplish when we believe in each other. When we open our hearts and lend a helping hand, we can turn even the darkest places into communities full of light." The crowd listened in rapt silence, moved by the authenticity of his words. As the months passed, Eli continued to expand his efforts, working with local schools to develop after-school programs, partnering with businesses to create job opportunities, and organizing neighborhood cleanup drives. His vision extended beyond Fairview, inspiring nearby towns to pursue similar paths of renewal. But not everyone was ready to embrace change so easily. Mr. Crawley, the once hostile neighbor, remained skeptical. He resisted the new spirit of community, clinging to old prejudices and fears of losing control. Yet even he couldn't deny the tangible improvements and growing sense of pride among residents. Eventually, Crawley approached Eli one afternoon, standing awkwardly by the community garden Eli had helped establish. "I suppose I underestimated you," he said gruffly, extending a hand. Eli shook it without hesitation, a smile breaking across his face. "It's never too late to be part of something bigger," Eli replied. Their handshake marked a turning point, symbolizing forgiveness and the possibility of unity. Eli's story became a beacon of hope far beyond Fairview. It reminded everyone that true strength lies in kindness, perseverance, and the willingness to uplift others. He had shown that no matter one's background or how others perceive them, everyone has the power to create meaningful change. Years later, as Eli sat on his porch rocking chair, now freshly painted but still creaking softly, he reflected on the journey. The neighborhood he once cleaned alone had become a family. The laughter, the friendships, the renewed spirit, it was all proof that respect and love were the greatest legacies one could leave. And as the sun set, casting warm hues across the sky, Eli smiled, knowing that the seeds of hope he planted would continue to grow for generations to come.